Hi, welcome to Congressional Cemetery. My name is Susan. Before we get started with today's tour, I want to see if the sound is working. So can you chime in the comment box, say like where you're watching from, where you're sitting right now, what city? People answering?
Not yet. We haven't anybody on live yet.
Oh.
That's okay. Oh, we got one.
Okay.
You can ask. Oh, we got 3. Go ahead. Ask them again.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we're just checking to see where everybody is from. So if you could write in the comment box, you can continue to use that comment box throughout the tour to ask questions from me or from Sarah, our program director, who's in charge of the camera.
All right.
Ready to go? Okay. Looks like we're good. All right. So on behalf of Christ Church Episcopalian Parish that owns this land, and the Association for the Preservation of Historic Congressional Cemetery that runs what goes on here, and 68,000 permanent residents, I want to welcome you to Washington Parish Burial Ground, now known as Congressional Cemetery. This is an introductory tour. I'm going to show you some of my favorite spots that you can see only at Congressional. And I'm going to tell you about some other things you can see when the world opens back up and you come back and visit us, because there's a lot to see. We've got a lot of events. We have a great gift shop. So we'll talk about all of that as we go. So if we're ready, my name is Susan. I'm from Annapolis, Maryland, and I'm one of the docents here. What you see is our main gate, recently restored. And let's talk about kind of what we are, why we're here, right? Why Congressional Cemetery is here. In 1790, all you Hamilton fans know this, right? The room where it happened. So one of the things that happened in that room was a decision about where to put the federal city, where to put the capital of this new country. And the decision was to put it here, obviously. And so Pierre L'Enfant drew up some plans for the city. One thing, around 1790, one thing he didn't put in the plans were burial grounds, big public burial grounds. Now, you could put people like in family plots or in churchyards, but there weren't big burial grounds to put people in. In about 1798, the city commissioners decided, should we walk this way? Okay, 1798, the city commissioners decided we need to put people someplace, because people are moving in, right? They're trying to build the city, they've got families, they're military, politicians. So they designated 2 spots. One kind of where DuPont Circle is now. All the bodies have been moved since then, but called Eastern Cemetery. And that worked pretty well. It was already a working cemetery. The other one, Western Cemetery, was initially established over by kind of where the H Street corridor is. That didn't work so well. A little swampier, prone to flooding, had some springs, things like that. So that one fell out of use. But the people on the west side still needed some place to bury their loved ones. 8 men who were members of Congressional Parish decided to pool their money in 1807, buy 4.5 acres, which were just about leaving now, and sell plots until they made their money back. When they made their money back, they would gift it to Christ Church Episcopal. So this all happened around 1807. They bought the land around early April. A few days later, one of the stone cutters at the Capitol died and needed to be buried. He was our first burial here, William Swinton. It's a beautiful stone. And it took till 1812 for them to get their money back and give it to Christ Church. So it was called Washington Parish Burial Ground at that time, and through the years has undergone several different iterations of that name. One of them is Congressional Cemetery, and that's what all these little mini monuments that you see, that's why it's called Congressional Cemetery. So here we are, people are working in DC, and cemetery opens up in April of 1807, and the first member of Congress to die in office dies in July of that year, Uriah Tracy. Back then, embalming wasn't so great, transportation wasn't so great. You pretty much buried people right near where they died because you couldn't get them anyplace. So Congress purchased space here for Uriah Tracy, and they had previously been burying people in other cemeteries. Like one was Rock Creek. They were it was hard to get to, like the carriages would have to go over rocks and creeks, I guess, because hence the name. And the women would have to get out and walk through water, and it wasn't a good deal. And this is 18 blocks straight shot from the Capitol, right? So they're like, well, let's try the new place. So they tried the new place. It turned out great, easy to get to, and Congress asked Benjamin Latrobe, who was the architect of D.C., this new, as they were building D.C., to monument, and that's what that is. It's called a cenotaph. Cenotaph means empty tomb, though they aren't all empty, right? About 90 of them, there are 165, but about 90 of them have people beneath. You can't tell, is this right, Sarah? You can't tell by looking at it. Yeah, you can't tell if there's somebody underneath or not. So they have these identical sandstone monuments. It's from the same quarry, Aquia Creek, that the sandstone from D.C., a lot of the buildings in D.C. came from. And so Congress just started doing that. Every time somebody would die in office, they would bury them here. They would have the ceremony, the procession. They would have a cenotaph. And then around Civil War, as it got easier to embalm people and move them around, people would sometimes bring the family member home. But if they died in office, Congress would still put up a cenotaph for them, right? So hence the name empty tomb. This went on for a few decades. 1860s, 1870s, money is getting tight, and Congress is starting to talk about ways to not pay money for things. And one of the senators, his name was Senator Hoare, he did not like these. In fact, a lot of people didn't like them, and he said, I believe his words that he used were, these are atrocities that brought new terror to the idea of dying and being buried underneath them. So they were not funded, and that was it. They stopped making them. There is one more, and if we have time at the end of the tour, I'm going to show you. It was the only one since the 1870s, about 100 years after that, a little over 100 years. And if we don't have time, I'll just tempt you with the idea. You can come back and visit us sometime. So let's move on this way. What do we have here? This is a chapel. This chapel was it was built in 1903 by Christ Church. Gave them some other opportunities, ways to have services. Those 3 windows with the bars over them, there are 3 on each side, and that's actually the place where you would store the coffin while you were waiting for the ceremony. So there were 6 spots where you could store the coffins. Inside, there's beautiful stained glass that's a recreation. The pews are the originals from 1903. And it provides us a great opportunity to have an inside place for events. So some of the things that happen in there are a book club. It's called Tombs and Tomes. If you're interested in that, check out our website. You can see the Congressional Cemetery Book Club. We meet every other month. We read very interesting books. We just finished Radium Girls, about women who worked in the early days of painting with fluorescent paint that wasn't good. So we have Tombs and Tomes. We have, when you can't do yoga mortis outside, they can have it inside the chapel. Notes from the Crypt was another thing. Sometimes they'd have musicians playing in there. All kinds of things going on in there. So again, check out our website if you have any thoughts about coming to any of these activities. So we're walking down one of our beautiful landscaped walkways here to one of our most famous residents. So if you can see, this is the resting place of John Philip Sousa. John Philip Sousa, probably know, is called the March King. He wrote lots of marches for the military. He was a local kid. His dad was in the Marine Corps band. And at age 13, when John Philip Sousa decided to run away and join the circus, his dad brought him back, said, no, you're going to be in the band. So there's a picture of him right there. So he led the Marine Corps band. People still come by and place little mementos for him. Every year on November 6th, big birthday party for him. So the Marine Corps band comes here and plays a little bit. Often there's a cake, there's a little ceremony. So again, keep that on your calendars, November 6th, John Philip Sousa's birthday. This is a big plot with a lot of beautiful markers here. We have John Philip Sousa Jr. his son, John Philip Sousa III, and there is room for John Philip Sousa IV, who I believe was the honorary chairman for our new gate that we started off looking at. So a lot of connections, family connections still here. So as we move down to the other end, let me show you a picture of this. There's that chapel we just looked at. This was a cemetery in not a heyday, right? During not good times. And if you look around now, you'll see how much better things look now. So let's talk about why that is. In the middle of the century, middle of the 20th century, people started leaving cities, right? A lot of cities, not just DC. And they started going to the suburbs, and that means that graveyards were left behind unattended. Sometimes there were even ancestors people didn't even know were there, that were buried there. And so many things, congressional included, kind of deteriorated a lot. The grass was like way up high. There were supposedly, drugs happening here, maybe prostitution, a lot of graffiti, and that, like that picture you just saw, it was kind of really, running down. Luckily, the people who lived around here who had dogs still found it valuable, right? It was still 35 acres with no cars in DC, and they walked their dogs here. Eventually, they started collecting money from themselves to try to help pay for some of the lawn care and the cemetery maintenance and all of that. That's evolved into what today is the Canine Corps. It's an organization, has its own bylaws and board of directors, and it supplies about a quarter of the cemetery's annual income. This is an exclusive club. Washington Post called it Washington, D.C.'s most exclusive club. It takes years and years to get in. Some people get on the waiting list before they have a house or a dog, just in hopes that they can eventually get in. It's limited to 600 people and 770 dogs. So, this way. So, on a regular day, you will often see people with their dogs off leash here in the cemetery. If you've seen any, I don't see any now, but water bowls around, and we'll see one up here. That's what that's for. So they contribute a great deal to the cemetery. Some people say they saved the cemetery. In 1997, the National Trust put the cemetery on its list of one of the 11 most endangered historic sites in the entire country. So that wasn't that long ago, right? 1997. So the dogs and their people and their money really helped us out. To this day, they continue to volunteer. You may see people around as we are walking who are like planting things around graves. That doesn't necessarily mean that belongs to their family. They could be volunteers who have adopted a grave. If you like to garden and you don't have a place to garden, or you just think this would be a neat place to come, you can adopt a grave as well, and you kind of take it on yourself to come and keep it up to date. All right, we're going to head right over this way to these beautiful roses. Watch your head. I guess that was just for you. No. All right, tallest monument in the cemetery. This is the Arsenal Monument. In June of 1864, right in the middle of the Civil War, there was an explosion at the armory here in DC, which was kind of down by where the Navy Yard is now. The girls, a lot of teenage girls worked inside, a lot of them from the same neighborhood, Irish immigrants, and they worked inside making artillery and the cartridges. And unfortunately, there was a big explosion out a window. Some flames came in, or some fire came in, and the place just went up. These poor girls were sitting there in hoop skirts and were often trapped at their tables working with fire coming up through the hoop skirts. It was hard to even identify a lot of the bodies. So this is a monument to them. It really threw the city for a loop. It was the biggest single day loss of life in DC during the Civil War, and President Lincoln himself led the procession to come out here. 14 of the 21 girls who died are buried here. The others are in a couple Catholic cemeteries or in family burial grounds. And this monument was donated by someone who worked or lived nearby. The statue is called Grief. You can see, it's kind of hard to see. At first I thought it was a cloud, but it's actually an engraving of the fire, like the explosion happening at the arsenal. And we have the names of the girls written down there. So I like this monument for a lot of reasons. One is, of course, it's the tallest. It was a significant event. I mean, obviously, if the President of the United States was leading the procession, this really had a big impact on the people of D.C. Also, because of the symbolism here, and some of the work of the early docents, called the dozen decent docents. There are more than a dozen now, but that's what they called themselves when they started. And they planted these roses. And the roses weren't just chosen because they were pretty. They were chosen because of the symbolism of the name. So the reddish ones are called the Mr. Lincoln variety. Then there are some pink ones that are called, no, the white ones are called Irish Hope. And the pink ones, I forgot the name, but the significance was it was bred, it was like registered as a type of rose in 1843, the year most of these girls would have been born. And so that continues on. One of those, it's not really marked anywhere, but it's I like that kind of symbolism that we continue to work with. If you like cemetery symbolism and iconography, one of our docents, Jeff, has written a really interesting tour about cemetery iconography. So keep an eye out for that. The tours are listed on Facebook and on the website. We have all kinds of specialty tours coming up in June, including, is Jeff doing LGBT? Okay, Jeff's doing LGBT tour. In June, we have a Civil War tour in June, I think. So a lot of, oh, fingers crossed. Okay, well.
You have a couple people who said hello.
Hello.
Yeah, Claire says you're doing a great job, and Haley Draper says hi.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good segue, because Haley Draper was with me the first time I ever came out to this cemetery, and it was because of a dog event, right? So usually in the spring we have something called Day of the Dog. This year it's been moved to Halloween. Keep an eye out for that if you have a dog, because that you don't have to be a member to bring your dog. Anybody can come. There's events, there's tours, there's little doggy things, like they can bob for hot dogs, and I have a picture of that in here. Let me see. There we go. There's some past years. Happy little dogs playing at Day of the Dog. So keep that on your calendar for Halloween. We're going to go down our 9/11 Memorial Walk. Look at our time. Okay. This is a crushed brick walk, and it was a path created to be the grove, the memorial grove. Every ward in DC was going to have one of these. I'm not sure they all ended up with one, but we have one right here. So on the side you can see another, like there's a beautiful example of adopt a plot, I assume. Not the family, yeah, might be the family, but I assume it's adopt a plot. You'll see a lot of little short benches as well as you walk around the cemetery. These are usually for urns, cremation, or cremated remains. And you'll see sometimes real interesting and personal things inscribed on them. Here we have a couple, let's see, get that out here. So we have a lot of real nice inscriptions, nice things people choose for themselves. So as we head down this path, we are heading towards something that is going to look very unusual to see in a cemetery with all of these stone monuments, and it is like a totem pole from the Lummi tribe in Washington State. The Lummi tribe, after 9/11, created a healing poles project. They created a lot of these totems with a lot of symbolism, some for World Trade Center site, some for the field in Pennsylvania, and this one was at the Pentagon. And the poles they named Freedom on the left, Liberty on the right, and Sovereignty on the top. And as we get closer, you can see a lot of the symbolism. They were donated to the country and stayed for a while at the Pentagon. Eventually they were moved here, and it actually turns out to be a great place for them. It fits in really well as in our 9/11 Memorial Walk. Some of the symbolism includes things like the paint. They used what they called the 4 colors of man, black, white, red, and yellow. The birds have 7 feathers each, and that's to symbolize American Airlines Flight 77, which is the one that flew into the Pentagon. So a real unusual thing, you see a little guy climbing out of the mouth up there? That symbolizes war. It eats you alive, right? And peace is facing in the east direction. So now we're going to move down this way and take a look at some unusual plots from far away. So how are we doing? Any questions? Any comments? Any requests?
Mostly everyone's just saying that it's really cool and it's wonderful and they're glad it's streaming live.
Oh, good. All right, fantastic.
A couple people had trouble with their laptops, but they figured it out.
Oh, good.
So they're good.
We don't like that.
And shout out, Jeff Rollins is watching now.
Oh, Jeff Rollins. Hello, Jeff. I just talked about your tours. Jeff and I have talked about this too.
We have a question from Paula. She says, isn't J. Edgar Hoover buried here?
Yes, he is. He absolutely is. He's one of our most famous residents. Well, if we look here at this crossroads, kind of take a look around. I mean, this is a big place. It's 35 acres now, right? Started at 4.5 in 1807. It's up to 35. It's, I believe, the largest privately owned property on the Anacostia River. And there are all kinds of different sections, right? It's so old that sometimes you're not quite sure who's buried in each section. This is sometimes referred to as Babyland. It's a very sad name, but it has to do with this is where the cemetery would often bury people or infants that didn't have the money for an actual plot, like a kind of a pauper's area almost. Not all of it. A lot of victims of the flu, the 1918 flu, are here. And far away at the bottom is a little bench with a star on it. Hear? I don't know if you can hear over the helicopter. Okay. That's fine. Gives me time to get this. All right, so this is who is there under that star. This is Mary Fuller. She was very famous in her day. She was in the original Frankenstein. She rivaled Mary Pickford for fame for a few years. But then she had kind of an upsetting situation with a guy, and she came back to DC to live with her mom for a while. And by the time she got herself ready to go back into the acting biz, things had changed a lot. They weren't silent films anymore. Nobody knew who she was. And so it kind of had a sad ending. She came back here, stayed with her mom. When her mom passed away, her sister, I believe, put her in St. Elizabeth's, which was a kind of an asylum for mental health. And she died there, just unknown, penniless. She was in an unmarked grave here for a long, long time. And one of the employees of the cemetery took a liking to her and actually had that made herself. There are quite a few stones, actually, that docents or employees have set up GoFundMe accounts for. or actually just paid for on their own for people who have unmarked graves. All right, as we walk down this section here, we're passing a bunch of mausoleums on the left. And one thing you may or may not be able to see if you don't have a picture of it as we get down there are boxes, colorful boxes on top of them. So what do you think those boxes would be for? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone?
Well, Jonathan Jack wants to know how the bees are doing.
That's the bees! Jonathan's got it! Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, all those boxes up there are beehives. Someone contacted the cemetery a few years ago with the idea that this actually is a great place for bees to collect pollen and make honey and live safely. And they tried it out with one hive, and it went pretty well. Oh, there's a whole bunch. Now there's a lot. So those are all bees. They live up there, and when they finish with their honey, I can show the label here. That's the label for the honey. So if you are interested in purchasing some of that, we're probably sold out this year, but yeah.
Sold out for this year, but we'll be harvesting again in the fall.
In the fall, yep.
Emily and Caitlin say hello.
Hi, Emmy. Hi, Katie. Trying to get them to come visit me, come see for themselves. So as we're walking, we can talk about some of the things you can see if you come here. We talked about Day of the Dog, which is usually in May, this year in October, but always in October is Soul Strolls, or some event that we have at night. And it's been really fascinating the last few years. Actors dress up, volunteers, as the person who is living here, the resident, laying here, I should say, and kind of come to life, and as your tour walks by, they tell you about their own life in their own words. That generally sells out right away, so keep an eye out for that. I think tickets usually go up in September, and there's usually 4 nights, and you buy like a timed ticket. I hope we're still. I hope we're back to going out in public by then. Oh, all of these things are, yeah. I mentioned the spring before. This is a doggy day spa, right? It's just a natural spring. Doggies like to play in it. And it is right across from one of our newest features here. This is the only pet cemetery in DC. All pets, not just dogs. You'll see we already have some people have engraved. There are both kind of communal plots for ashes as well as actual markers on the ground. And we call that our kingdom of animals. So another very unique feature. All right, let's head this way. So we're heading this way toward a 4-time mayor of DC, Marion Barry, who passed away recently, and he is buried facing his constituents as he wanted to be. And he has quite a big memorial here. I believe his wife helped design. And lots of symbols. And this is a good place to promote Jeff's iconography tour also, because one thing that's fascinating for people who like cemetery symbolism and gravestone studies is to look at the iconography, how things have changed over time. So if you've ever been to cemeteries in like Boston or Charleston or really old ones, you'll notice that the stones look a lot like this. right? Scary, skulls with wings, all that kind of stuff. Really kind of emphasizing death as a finality, a scary place, someplace you wouldn't want to go and visit. As we moved into the 19th century, the Victorians started really catching they started really enjoying the idea of cemeteries as parks. They called it the rural cemetery movement. Cemeteries started to look like this one. So instead of all crowded together by a church with all of those scary skulls, you started to see like wide open spaces, benches, iconography such as maidens and veils and ivy, wording such as rest in peace or slumber. So it was more of like a long-term sleep instead of the finality of death that the early cemeteries had. This iconography is ultra modern, right? So it even goes beyond that, and you can kind of choose quotes that mean something to you, passages from the books or Bibles, hands that symbolize things, lots of symbolism from DC. And of course, there's still is the Greek columns, which have its own ancient symbolism. All right. Let me check out time here. Okay, we're going to move this way until I get in the shade and see what time it is. Can you tell what time it is?
I think it is 30 after.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. This area is affectionately called Gay Corner. And the reason why is it's a pretty memorable place for our LGBT community for a variety of reasons, but we're going to look at one of the biggest reasons right here. And I'll give you a chance to focus in on that while I find this picture. Yep. All right, that is Leonard Matlovich. So on the cover of Time, he was the first one to openly challenge the military ban on gays serving in the military. As you can see, he has a lot of symbolism here. He lived in this area. He was in the Air Force. I think he was from an Air Force family, highly decorated, spotless record. So he was a good person to kind of challenge that. And he challenged it. He was kicked out of the military. He lived in the area and would walk in the cemetery and thought this would be a good place for a memorial to gay veterans. So he purposefully didn't, put his name all over it. You can see his name right there, but he has symbols like the upside down pink triangle, which is what gay men were forced to wear in Nazi concentration camps. And then the right side up pink triangle, which is a reclaiming of that symbol and kind of became a symbol of the gay rights movement. Has a moving inscription that he wrote himself. When I was in the military, they gave me a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving 1. There are ceremonies here on Veterans Day, really throughout the year a lot for gay veteran organizations. There are other landmarks like Frank Kameny, Barbara Giddings, other real well-known people in the gay rights movement, all here. I bet somebody wants to ask what those rocks are on top, but they just haven't typed it in. Okay, all right, I'll answer it then. The rocks on top are a traditional way, I believe it's traditionally for Jewish graves. Now everybody does it. You put a rock to commemorate that you were there. You remember the person, you recognize them. And that's why you'll see on so many of these rocks or other mementos. One grave we will not see that is here is that of Matthew Brady, who was a famous Civil War photographer, and just because it's too far away. And people come and still leave things that are associated with photography on his stone. Just like people leave some kinds of things for conductors on John Philip Sousa's stone.
Monica Adams asked, what are those rocks on top?
Thank you. Good question, Shin. Okay. This is one of our most famous residents. And someone asked about this before. J. Edgar Hoover. This is his family plot. He's a local guy. He went to school, high school, college, and law school, all here in D.C. He is the founding director of the FBI. He was the director for a very long time, under 8 presidents, 8 different presidents, and he worked until the day he died, literally. In 1972, he went to work, he came home, he had dinner, went to bed, and the next day his maid found him, he'd already passed away in his bedroom. So J. Edgar Hoover is known for, he started the fingerprint kind of library catalog system. The 10 most wanted list, he started that. He started really requiring different types of training, like in law and accounting, very strict dress code. And people come here from the FBI. Many of these things, this, like the wrought iron fence and these were not put up by the cemetery or by his family. These were put up by people just who wanted to honor him by adding something to the plot. So he is there with his mom, dad, and his infant sister who died before he was even born. J. Edgar Hoover was a big fan of dogs. Let's go this way. Big fan of dogs, which I will tell you about when you come for the dog tour. All right. But let's just say he liked Cairn Terriers and Beagles a lot. This little path actually is a good spot to compare a few things, just for people who are interested in the stones themselves. This is the sandstone. This is the oldest kind of marker we have here. It can flake off. I think it's called delaminate in the weather. It really takes a lot of upkeep. That's also what some of the Canine Corps money goes toward is upkeep of a lot of these historic things. So that's the oldest kind. This here is marble. Marble is really common. The Victorians, again, really into death, really into Italy. Anything marble was fantastic, so a lot of marble used during the 19th century. But it's, as you can see, kind of acid rain and other elements start to make it. It's called sugaring, and it actually feels like sugar if you were to touch up there. This, on the other hand, is granite. This is what you want if you want people to be looking at your stone years and years from now. Granite is it holds up really well in the elements, and you'll see all 3 of those things, as well as something called a zinker, which is an unusual type of catalog ordered marker made to look like zinc. It was really popular for a little while.
Yeah, and while it looks like there may have been a fire or something, that's just the way that the sandstone ages. And so they have to be cleaned on a regular basis, or else they look like they caught on fire, like the Jefferson mine.
Oh yeah.
And the Vex too.
So there's a lot of wildlife. Sarah was saying since the canine crew hasn't been here for a while, and since the city's been shut down, the wildlife is like starting to come back, right? So there's lots of birds and other things. It's very pretty. But one does miss the dogs, right? We are walking towards some vaults. We're going to look at the public vault. But each of these vaults is owned by a family, generally, that has their name on it. And they usually don't, when you see inside one, they're kind of cavernous. and you'd think there'd be shelves and you'd put all the coffins on them, but most of them did not have shelves. You just stacked coffins up inside of them. So the one we're going to look at here is the public vault. This vault was actually purchased by or made by Congress, paid for by Congress in the early, let's see, I think 1830s. I hope that's right. Yeah, okay. Sounds good. And the reason why is sometimes you had to store people, store bodies before you could get them in the ground. And so they had this vault. All the congressmen who died in office would stay in here, but regular people could rent it also for like $5 to get a spot. The holes that say public vault, that's ventilation. And if you open it up, there are steps that go all the way down into this big kind of just open space. We use it actually now. They stopped using it, I think, around the 1930s. And we use it now for a lot of events. So Soul Strolls has the bartenders in there. There have been about 6,000 people that have rested in here. 3 of them were presidents. Let's see, Zachary Taylor, William Henry Harrison, and John Quincy Adams. They aren't buried here, but they waited in there for a little while. The longest resident you probably have heard of, right? Her name was Dolly Madison. Dolly Madison was James Madison's wife, so she was First Lady. And she was very social. She knew every one of the first 12 presidents, which I think is amazing. Every single one of them she knew. Unfortunately, her son from her first marriage gambled away a lot of the money, like all the money. And so when she passed away, there was no money to get her to the family estate to be buried next to James. So she was in here for 2.5 years. And then she moved over here to the Costin Vault. And I think she had a niece who married into that family. She was in there for like 5 years. Finally, and people were collecting money to get her sent back to the estate, but the credit, like people kept coming and taking it because her son, owed them so much money. Eventually, she found her way back, but she's our longest resident here in the vaults. She's here for a long time. All right, and we do have time to see that one cenotaph that I told you about earlier. You've got stones on top again. This cenotaph was put in long after Congress started paying for them. This was put in 1981. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. He was here for the ceremonies, and he actually has a monument, cenotaph kind of as well right over there. He's not buried here. And this was for a couple guys, picture here, Hale Boggs and Nick Begich. They were campaigning, I believe it was Begich, it was from Alaska, campaigning. Boggs went with him, and the plane crashed. It still hasn't been found to this day. So they both died in office, but this was long after Congress was putting these cenotaphs in. His wife, Lindy Boggs, took over his seat in Congress for quite a while, and I believe she was instrumental in having this placed. So there was a dedication ceremony in 1981, and this is the newest, the only one since 1870s.
Do you want to mention his daughter?
Yes, and actually, does she have a stone yet? Oh, not yet. Okay, right there it is. Yes, his daughter, Cokie Roberts, is a famous journalist. Was just buried. Her ashes were interred in this fall. And Cokie Roberts' daughter, Rebecca, is co-author of one of the great books in the cemetery gift shop about the cemetery. It has tons of pictures, lots of facts. The gift shop has all kinds of things. There's a book called In the Shadow of the Capitol, which is about the cemetery. There's the picture narrative book that Rebecca Roberts co-authored. There's books on the arsenal, that one day, the arsenal explosion that we talked about. There's books about a steamship disaster. We have a whole family that died on a steamship disaster, and there's a book about that. So go ahead and check it out. All right, so if there are any, I'll wait for a second, see if there are any questions.
I think we got most of the questions and we asked them as we went.
Okay.
There was a question about how do you get your pet.
Oh, good question. I believe you would contact, contact the cemetery office, the main office. It's like you were buying a plot for a person, and find out about different costs and different options. They do need to be cremated, though. They're not burying bodies.
And I think this person maybe wasn't with us at the beginning. They asked, what's the oldest burial plot in this cemetery?
Oh, that's okay. That's Thomas, 1807. He is a stone cutter from the Capitol, and he died just a few days after the cemetery was purchased. As we were looking at those different kinds of stones, his stone was pretty close to that, over on that side of the cemetery. So he was one.
And last question is, how's the mausoleum project going?
I don't know.
I can answer that a little bit. They're continuing to work on it. They just worked on the facade of the Hamilton Waterston vault. So you'll see pictures of that coming out in our newsletter soon. All right, I think that's all our questions.
Okay, thank you so much for spending some time with us on this beautiful Saturday morning. At least it is here. Hope it's beautiful where you are. Please visit the website. Take a look at our events. Take a look at our different educational tours. There are lots and lots of specialized walking tours that you can just take yourself. Just women, just Civil War, just architects, just journalists. I mean, you wouldn't believe there's so many American Indians, African American, so many different specific tours that you can take and just walk around on your own. Otherwise, when the world opens back up, we give tours Saturdays, April through October at 11 a.m. And sometimes Sunday strolls at 1 p.m. And keep an eye out for our special events. Thank you very much.